Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is simple. Take a complex pile of sources, pull out what really matters, and get you expertly informed fast.
And today, while we're diving into a trade conflict that's pretty unusual even for today's world, we're looking at this really strange diplomatic spat between the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, two incredibly close allies. This wasn't your typical fight over lumber or something.
No, not at all.
We're talking about a major trade negotiation with billions, like $3.6 billion Canadian day in trade.
Huge numbers.
And it gets blown up, just terminated via social media posts. And the reason given, an ad campaign featuring Ronald Reagan, of all people.
It honestly sounds like something out of a political satire, but the fallout is hitting actual businesses, actual consumers. So we really need to unpack this. We'll look at the ad, the really strong accusations from the U.S. president.
Explosive accusations.
Yeah. And the whole Canada federal versus provincial government tangle in this. And, what does this blow up mean for the tariffs that are already hitting things like steel and aluminum?
Okay, let's start right there with the spark. The ad campaign itself, this massive 75 million Canadian dollar push by Ontario. What's crucial, like you said, is this wasn't Ottawa, not Prime Minister Carney's government.
Exactly. That's key here. This was Ontario's premier, Doug Ford. He leads a conservative provincial government, which isn't the same party as the federal Liberals under Carney. They often operate kind of separately.
So Ford just decided to, go around the federal diplomats? Take his argument straight to the American public.
That's pretty much it. And he was incredibly focused with where he spent that money.
75 million Canadian is a lot of focus.
It is. He wasn't just putting ads anywhere. He ran these anti-tariff spots on major U.S. networks, Fox News, NBC, ABC, specifically aimed, really, at Republican districts.
Like a political heat-seeking missile?
You could say that. His stated goal was pure political maneuvering. Ford actually told reporters he hoped to cause a split, saying he wanted Reagan Republicans fighting with the ACT group, trying to use Reagan's legacy against the current administration's policies.
Wow. That's definitely playing hardball. And the ad itself, what was in it? You said it used Reagan's voice.
Yeah, a minute-long ad using clips from a 1987 Reagan radio address about free trade. And the quotes they picked were, they were designed to hit hard.
Like what?
Well, you hear Reagan saying things like, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing, but only for a short time.
Okay, hitting the short-term versus long-term argument.
Right, and then following up with the economic consequences. Over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. And then the big warning, high tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation. Fierce trade wars, markets shrink and collapse, millions of people lose their jobs. It's a pretty stark picture.
Definitely framing tariffs as disastrous, and people saw this, like it wasn't buried on some obscure channel.
Oh, no, it was very visible, spotted on TV stations right in the Washington, D.C. area. It even ran during a World Series game, an ALCS game with the Toronto Blue Jays playing. The White House couldn't possibly miss it.
Which leads us right into the next part, the explosion. The ad lands, and almost immediately the U.S. president tweets he's terminating the trade talks, calls the ad fake and fraudulent.
Yeah, the reaction was incredibly fast and arguably out of proportion considering the source was Ontario, not the actual Canadian federal negotiators. The president insisted Canada cheated and got caught for implying Reagan disliked tariffs. He claimed Reagan loved tariffs for our country and its national security.
Okay, wait, hang on. This is where it gets tricky. How could it be fraudulent if it used Reagan's actual words from a speech? Spinning is one thing, but fraud.
And that's really the core issue here, isn't it? The aha moment, maybe. The Reagan Foundation itself chimed in pretty quickly. They said the ad misrepresents the address and that Ontario never asked for permission to use and edit the remarks.
Get it. So that's the key word. Ontario said it was unedited, but it wasn't.
Well, they used complete sentences from the original speech, but they spliced them together. They took 5 sentences from different parts of a 5-minute address and put them back to back in a 60-second ad. They completely changed the order and, crucially, the context.
Ah, okay. What was the original context then?
The original 1987 speech was actually Reagan explaining why he was imposing some tariffs, specifically on Japanese semiconductors. He framed it as a reluctant special case, despite being a huge free trade guy. He negotiated the original Canada-U.S. free trade deal.
So the speech was basically Reagan saying, look, I love free trade, but in this one specific instance, we have to act. And the ad just cut off the butt.
Pretty much. It took out all the nuance, all the justification for his specific action, and made it sound like a blanket condemnation of tariffs anytime, anywhere. It really twisted his legacy to fit their message.
Okay, that definitely sounds like misrepresentation. Maybe not outright fraud legally, but certainly deceptive editing.
Exactly. But the president's accusations went even further than just correcting the record on Reagan. He directly accused Canada of trying to illegally influence an upcoming U.S. Supreme Court decision.
Whoa, okay. That's a massive escalation. What Supreme Court decision?
It was about the president's power to impose global tariffs using something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA.
IEPA, right. Why is that the crucial law here, and why link the ad to a court case about it?
Well, IEPA is basically the legal tool the president was using to impose these tariffs without needing explicit congressional approval for each one. It lets the president act during a declared national emergency related to an unusual and extraordinary threat.
Okay, so it's about emergency powers.
Yes. And the Supreme Court case wasn't about whether the tariffs were a good idea, but whether using IEPA for broad, ongoing trade disputes was actually a legal use of that emergency power. Was it really an emergency in the way the law intended?
I see. So the challenge was about potential executive overreach.
Correct. So by claiming Ontario's ad was meant to influence that specific case, the president wasn't just saying it was bad politics. He was framing it as a foreign government interfering in the U.S. judicial system to undermine the legal basis for his entire tariff strategy. That changes it from a trade dispute into, well, something much more serious.
A sovereignty issue, almost.
Yeah.
That's just an incredible rhetorical leap.
Yeah.
Which obviously sets up the diplomatic mess we saw next. The U.S. cuts off talks with Ottawa, even though the ad came from Ontario.
Yeah, and that really highlights the challenge when provincial actions spill over internationally. Kevin Hassett, who was the director of the National Economic Council then, kind of tried to smooth it over, saying the termination was about the president's general frustration and that the Canadians had been, quote, very difficult to negotiate with, lacking flexibility. He even called it a needed timeout.
But back in Ottawa, Prime Minister Carney seemed genuinely blindsided.
Apparently so. Carney had to quickly shift into damage control mode, saying Canadian officials stand ready to talk again, emphasizing that, a lot of progress has been made already on specific things like steel and aluminum.
But he also basically said Canada can't control U.S. trade policy.
He did. He stressed that Canada can't control the trade policy of the United States, which really just underscores their difficult position caught between an unpredictable U.S. administration and, frankly, a provincial premier back home who's poking the bear.
Yeah, because Ford in Ontario wasn't backing down at all, was he?
Not one bit. While Ottawa was trying to calm things down, Ford doubled down. He insisted Reagan knew the U.S. and Canada are stronger together and actually confirmed the ad would keep running even during the World Series. It's a pretty stark example of internal Canadian politics messing with international relations.
And that just poured fuel on the fire domestically in Canada too, I bet.
Oh, yeah. The opposition, especially Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, immediately blamed Carney for failing to get a deal done. Others, like the Green Party leader, just called Trump's reaction thin-skinned and petulant. Lots of finger-pointing.
Okay, so politics aside, let's get back to the real-world impact. What did this breakdown actually mean for trade? What are the costs?
Well, they're significant. You have to remember, even before this termination, the tariffs were biting hard. There was already a 35% tariff on many Canadian goods not covered by the existing CUSMA agreement.
And how much trade is covered?
That's the shocking part. U.S. Congress estimates suggested only about 38% of Canadian goods were actually entering the U.S. tariff-free under the agreement. So the majority of trade was already facing duties.
38% free. That doesn't sound like a very free trade agreement in practice.
It certainly raises questions. And then you have the specific, really high tariffs, 50% on steel and aluminum, 50%, and 25% on cars, hitting non-U.S. parts specifically.
Ouch. That has to force companies to change things.
Absolutely. We saw direct consequences. GM and Stellantis, for example, had their tariff-free import quotas into Canada reduced because they'd cut back assembly work in Ontario. It's that direct link trade actions lead to job impacts, lead to policy responses.
So the tariffs act like a lever, trying to force companies to move production or sourcing, often leading to job losses in the place being tariffed. And all that instability, whether it's car parts or steel or lumber, that eventually hits us as consumers, right?
Absolutely. It disrupts supply chains, increases costs for manufacturers, and yeah, ultimately means higher prices for lots of everyday goods.
And it wasn't even the first time talks broke down so abruptly, was it?
No, that's a really important point. This was the second time the president had just suddenly cut off trade talks with Canada. The first time was over a proposed digital services tax by Canada. Canada eventually backed down on that tax. It kind of shows a pattern where these very personalized, sometimes non-economic factors seem to drive major decisions in this critical trade relationship.
So summing it up, we've got this tangled mess of what high-stakes trade policy clashing with some really intense political theater using Reagan's ghost as a weapon.
Yeah, and layered on top is that tricky dynamic between Canada's federal government trying to negotiate and a provincial government acting almost like a rogue state, diplomatically speaking. The whole thing just feels constantly fragile.
Right, and for you listening, understanding this isn't just about politics. That fragility, that friction, it doesn't stay in government buildings. It ripples through global supply chains. It affects the cost of the car you might buy, the house you might build, even the can of soda in your hand. Trade instability means higher costs for you.
And here's something really interesting to think about after we wrap up. Despite all this drama, the terminated talks, the angry accusations, everything that should have spooked markets, North American stock markets barely flinched.
Really? What happened?
Well, the Toronto Stock Exchange Index actually went up slightly, about 0.6%. U.S. indices also rose about 1%. It was remarkably calm.
That is weird. So what does that tell us? What does that calm reaction suggest about how Wall Street or Bay Street view this whole thing? Are they just so used to the drama now that they ignore it? Or do they maybe think deep down that because the economies are so linked, a resolution is always kind of inevitable, regardless of the rhetoric?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? A real disconnect between the political heat and the market's temperature. Definitely something to mull over the next time you see trade policy being made via tweet.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.